Hello, and thank you for joining this webinar today. Please be aware we're recording, and that recording will be made available on Defra's YouTube channel in a few days. The webinar is the first of the Future Fisheries Management Live series of events that Defra is hosting throughout summer. And this webinar aims to give an overview of the steps that the UK government set out on Monday, which aim to deliver a thriving, sustainable fishing industry and healthy marine environment for generations to come. It will provide a high-level overview, and although on this webinar we're not opening a Q&A, there will be further opportunities to talk to us both in person and online, and we'll give more details of this at the end. I'd like to now hand over to the first of our speakers, Robbie Fisher.
Thank you, Nicola, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our consultation briefing update. I work in domestic fisheries reform for Defra, and I'm really looking forward to being able to talk through some of our work today with you, with my colleague Johnny Peters. So I'm just going to set some of the context around this before we set off. So essentially, this is a really exciting moment. We announced the launch of consultation on lots of different policy areas. And essentially, this is a kind of part of an ongoing process to replace the common fisheries policy in our own domestic framework and legislation. So the joint fisheries statement, which we published last year, sort of sets out a combined UK ambition to support a modern, resilient and environmentally responsible fishing sector, maintain and where necessary enable our fish stocks to recover to sustainable levels, and work to reduce the environmental effects of fishing on the marine environment and the coastal environment. So that's a huge challenge, and the way we want to do it is to work closely and collaboratively with fishing sector, anglers and other stakeholders to deliver and develop the right policies to deliver this ambition in the joint fisheries statement. So it's a really, really exciting moment, and actually we are tackling these problems in a very different way than the previous management setup. So just in terms of, I'm going to take us through the fisheries management plans, and I just wanted to kind of give everybody a bit of a sort of quick canter through what a fisheries management plan is, because they're quite a new policy. So essentially, it does what it says on the tin. It's a plan for the sustainable management of a fishery, and the main components of it are an assessment of the stock, or what we know about the stock, which in some cases is not a huge amount. It sets out the policies for the sustainable harvesting of those species or the fishery area, and where we can, we want to use the plans to contribute to the achievement of wider fisheries objectives in the Act, of which there's 8. So really new, really exciting policy. And the first 6 that we launched on the consultation on Monday are our sort of first set covering England and Wales. So we've proposed whelk, crab and lobster, bass, southern North Sea channel mixed flatfish, channel demersal and king scallop. And these have all been led by different delivery partners. Seafish have worked with fishermen and anglers on the development of the whelk, crab and lobster, and they've led that process for us. Bass was a sort of combined approach with the Policy Lab, and Defra leading the development of the plan. Southern North Sea flatfish was led by Defra, channel demersal led by our colleagues at the MMO, and king scallop was led through the sort of combined approaches of the Scallop Industry Consultation Working Group and Defra. So we really want to explore the full capability of different ways to develop these plans in these front runners. So we're using the opportunity to pilot and test different approaches to developing these plans, which has yielded a huge amount of learning, which we're kind of bringing into the next phase of plans, which we're drafting at the moment. So I'm just going to take us through a very, very kind of high level sort of summary of what's proposed in the FMPs and what's open for consultation. And I think we're really, really looking forward to engaging with stakeholders through the summer and talking about, what issues we've identified and the policies and proposals in those plans that we're putting forward to try and get to grips with them. In terms of whelk, it's a national plan, covers all of English waters. the issues that we've identified are, there's quite a lot. It's a very data poor fishery. We don't have a stock assessment, and there's very little and limited management. But in terms of the environmental effect of the fishery, it's actually, the environmental report substantiates this. It's actually quite an environmentally friendly fishery, which is great. There's a few wider risks that the report identified. So in terms of what we're proposing in the short term, in this plan, we're going to be looking at seasonal closures and establishing a licensing regime, and then shifting into a sort of longer term, because these FMPs last for 6 years. We're going to take some more time to work with stakeholders and fishermen who operate in that fishery, to establish a kind of an effort and exploitation management regime, which is essentially will be made up of, or need to consider different approaches like seasonal closures, technical measures, and possibly potentially effort controls. But that's something we're going to need to take quite a long time and do a lot more thinking to develop. So the next one is brown crab and lobster. So again, this is a national plan, and there's quite a lot of uncertainty in the stock assessment and methodology. But what we do know is that effort's very high in these fisheries, and certainly probably beyond where we want it to be. Again, the environmental report identifies that there's limited environmental impacts in this fishery, but there are some concerns that we do need to look at. So again, another common theme, we're going to look at developing the evidence base in this fishery over the short term. And alongside that, to make sure that the fishery is safe and secure, we're going to look at minimum landing sizes, and looking to kind of bring together what is quite a fragmented management picture for those fisheries. Longer term, again, with the Whelk, we're going to look to developing a sort of more comprehensive approach, looking at a combined set of measures to bring exploitation of those fisheries into more sustainable levels, and to make sure that the kind of there's a longer term managed and consistent management approach developed across the country. We're also in that process going to take the opportunity to look at what finer scale management might look like, because there was some feedback what we got during the consultation process, which was that was something that people would be quite keen to see. So moving on to Scallop, King Scallop. Now this is a plan that covers English and Welsh waters, which was quite exciting, to be able to develop. What we're sort of looking at in the fishery is, again, the management is quite fragmented, and we're going to look to over time work through that, and where appropriate look to harmonise management measures where we can. Again, our biomass assessments and our stock assessments aren't where we want them to be, so we want to continue to invest in building the evidence base and work with the industry, who helped, who essentially drove the development of the plan, which was fantastic, to over time get a really, a better understanding of about what exploitation looks like in this fishery. The environmental report does identify that there are some high risks. Scallop dredge fisheries do have quite a high effect on the seabed, and we want to take some time to work through that, and start to think about what actually mitigating and reducing that effect looks like. But we do need to consider the wider spatial changes that are going on at sea, particularly with the management of marine protected areas and the rollout of offshore wind, and how that's interacting with the fishery. So that's quite a complicated challenge for us to work through, and I think we're going to want to do that, working with the industry and wider stakeholders to kind of tackle those and consider those complicated issues. I'm just going to skip on now to the bass FMP. Sorry, this is quite a swift canter. So again, this is English and Welsh waters fishery joint plan. So I think what we know about bass is that it's relatively data rich. Again, it's one where we've got quite a good understanding of where the stock is, but recruitment is low, so we do have to be really quite cautious about what we do. We've got evidence gaps in terms of commercial discarding, recreational removals, and the socioeconomic benefits of the fishery to coastal communities. And we're going to look to work to fill those gaps over coming years. Commercial access is restricted to domestic authorization system, and the environmental report does identify some sort of wider risks and impacts potentially of bycatch in the fishery, which we're going to need to look at. So again, in terms of what we're looking to do over the current, in the short term, we want to establish a management group in the fishery, so we can work with commercial, recreational, wider interests to kind of identify and deal with these issues and address them over time. We're going to review existing management measures. I think the priorities are the domestic authorization system, so we can act more quickly and respond more quickly to management challenges in the fishery. The current SI system is particularly slow, and I think that causes a lot of frustration to people. And then in the longer term, we're going to look to look more at size limits, review of inshore netting systems, and the consistency of enforcement across the IFCAs and the MMO. So a lot of work to do there, and a kind of a lot of long-term actions that we are going to need to and want to invest in through the implementation of the plan. So that takes me on to the Demersal. So this is a big plan, 19 species, bony fish, elasmobranch and cephalopod. It's an area-based plan, so it's along the channel, the English Channel, and it looks at non-quota species, demersal species primarily. So again, this is a kind of a fishery where our species are are very poorly understood. Some are not assessed at all, and that's a big challenge for our management approaches. Management again is very variable through the fisheries, and our understanding of the pressure of the fishery on the marine environment is quite variable. So it's worth noting that alongside that, we've been running a consultation on fly seining. There's a lot of concerns about increase in fly seining pressure in the fishery. And the outcome of that consultation is we are moving forward with a removal of the derogation for the 40 mil mesh size, targeting squid, to improve the sustainability of that fishery and reduce the pressure on non-quota demersal species. So in terms of moving forward, in the short term, we've got a lot of management measures that we want to consider with stakeholders. We're going to consider further restrictions on fly seining effort, potentially looking at tonnage and engine power restrictions. We're going to look at minimum conservation reference sizes across a number of different species. And with cuttlefish, we're looking at potentially seasonal closures, and I think that's there are some concerns about exploitation rates in that fishery, and I think we're kind of keen to work with people to identify what measures would help improve the sustainability of those stocks. And then longer term, going to continue to build up our sort of governance in the fishery, so we can work with stakeholders to develop a more sort of consistent and consolidated long-term management plan for those fish stocks. So big and complicated fishery, that one, but really important to a wide range of stakeholders. So that one in particular is, I think, going to take us quite a long time to get right. So I think it just emphasizes the scale of some of the challenges in these fisheries and how we're going to need to continue to take a very long-term approach to their management. So finally, I'm just going to go to the Southern North Sea Flatfish plan. So this is quite an interesting one. So this is an area-based FMP in the Southern North Sea. Includes 9 flatfish stocks, and this is a mixture between tax species and non-quota species. So the TA species we know quite a lot about, and the plan sets out essentially kind of some principles about how we will negotiate and engage with the EU to ensure sustainable exploitation of those species. And then the non-quota species, in particular halibut, we know very little about, so we're looking to invest in continued sort of evidence gathering, so we can feed that into the sort of ongoing adaptive management of the FMP to ensure sustainable exploitation of those stocks. We're also looking at how to continue the sole survey, which is a sort of really important thing for local fishers that we want to kind of continue to invest in, and we're looking to restart that monitoring program just as soon as we're able. So again, similar with other trawl fisheries and dredge fisheries in this group of FMPs, there are some challenges, identified and risks identified in the environmental report around seabed abrasion in particular. And we're going to need to take a sort of longer term approach, as I mentioned, with considering offshore wind and marine protected area management and gear innovation to see how we can progressively start to address those environmental risks. So forgive me, that's quite a brief canter through the FMPs. I do hope it gives you a bit of a flavour for the sort of shorter and long-term measures. They're really excited about talking to people over the summer about the contents of these plans, with a review to amending them and then getting them published by the end of this year, and then on into the implementation process, which I'm sure we will be doing a webinar on in the not too distant future. So I'm going to hand over to Johnny, and he can take us through the other consultations. Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks, Robbie. Just whilst I'm taking control of the slides here, I'll say that good morning, everyone. I'm Johnny Peters. I work with Robbie in Fisheries Policy. So Robbie's just talked you through the FMPs that we began consultation on this week, but there were a number of other items in the announcement as well. So I'm going to give you a quick run through those. The first one I'm going to talk about is on the screen now, expanding remote electronic monitoring, or REM, in England. So we're basically referring here to the use of cameras, sensors and other equipment which can monitor at sea fishing activities and capture data about them. So this is a technology that we've been trialing and using for several years, and the data has got many uses. It can inform science and tax setting, it can inform management measures, and it can be used for compliance and enforcement too. So our consultation proposes how we could expand the use of REM in English waters. We've identified the 5 priority fisheries shown on the screen, and we propose starting with one of these. Initially, we'd work with volunteers from among the industry to get the scheme up and running, and then later REM would become mandatory for all vessels within that fishery. This includes both domestic and foreign vessels. After this, we'd move on to the next fishery and so on. Our vision is to have fully documented fisheries across all of our waters. And in this consultation, we are seeking your views on that idea and on our proposed approach for delivering it. The next item is about reforming how we manage discards in England. So in recent years, you'll probably know that this has been governed by the landing obligation. However, the landing obligation has been ineffective at reducing discards, and so we're considering other. The first thing in our consultation are proposed changes to how we account for catches. So the aim is to have full catch accounting. And by that, we basically mean ensuring that all catches, both landings and discards, are counted against quotas. But we also recognise that possibly the best way of managing discards is to avoid unwanted catch in the first place. So we also set out an approach in the consultation of working with industry and other stakeholders to implement avoidance measures such as gear selectivity changes. Now, we know there have been many trials of gear improvements, and we know that there are measures that could be deployed that would reduce unwanted catch. So what we really want to do here is work in collaboration with industry and others to identify the most appropriate measures to implement in our priority stocks, and then move forward with implementing them. Any avoidance measures such as these would apply to both domestic and foreign vessels operating in English waters. The consultation also proposes various updates to landing obligation exemptions. They're all quite technical issues. I'm not going to run through them here, but they're all contained within an annex to the consultation. And it also seeks views on the concept of a discard prevention charging scheme. So this is a mechanism that could potentially allow fishers to pay a charge to land unwanted catch for which they do not hold sufficient quota. More on that in the consultation document itself. Now, there are 2 other reform consultations I'm going to mention briefly. One is a consultation on a proposal to remove the licence cap for under 10-metre vessels in England. So currently, this restricts the amount of quota fish that can be caught by some vessels. This cap has been temporarily lifted in the past couple of years, and we are consulting now on lifting this permanently. And the other is a consultation on a proposed recreational scheme for catching bluefin tuna. Since leaving the EU, we've acquired quota in bluefin tuna. And in the past couple of years, we've allowed this to be caught under a charter scheme. And this year, also for the first time, we are beginning a commercial trial. So the consultation that we've launched this week proposes putting in place legislation to enable a recreational scheme in future too. That really concludes our run through the different consultations which went live this week. And on the screen now, you should be able to see the closing date for each of these. So these are staggered from late summer going into the autumn. And these give you the dates by which you need to respond with any views you have about the proposals we have put forward. So I'm now going back to Nicola to talk through engagement events and a bit more about how you can have your say.
Thank you very much. We've launched a series of events, Future Fisheries Management Live, and today's webinar is the first event in this series. We will be holding more webinars, policy specific ones with Q&A sessions, so look out for those. In terms of in-person events, we will be visiting coastal locations around England to meet with stakeholders, and we invite any stakeholders interested in any of the consultations to join us at these events, find out more and respond to consultations at the event. You'll notice on this map there's a handful of locations marked with the yellow so far. That's the first 2 weeks that have been published. The additional markers without labels are locations that we will be announcing soon, so keep an eye out. All the events will be on our Eventbrite page, so the link is given on this page. You can also just search on Eventbrite for Future Fisheries Management Live, or just Fisheries. It should show you local events. We're inviting anyone who wants to attend to book now. That way you'll get updates about the event. But also people can just join on the day. We're happy for that too. The remaining locations I mentioned will be published to Eventbrite over the next coming weeks. But how to hear about these coming up, you can go to the Eventbrite organiser page, scroll to the bottom and there's a little follow button. You'll get notifications from there. You can just check back if you want, or sign up to the Defra's Marine and Fisheries update. So that's a bi-weekly email, and I'll give information on the final slide. And that's just hearing about everything that is to do with Defra Marine and Fisheries. The artwork you see on this page, you'll find coming out on adverts in the near future, so across Defra's social media, bulletins, and also in fishing news. And so the last thing to say is thank you for joining us. We will publish the recording of this webinar on Defra's YouTube channel in the next few days. On this page are some key links for information that can be found on gov.uk on the topics we've covered today. And you can stay up to date, as I said, with Defra's news by subscribing to the Marine and Fisheries update, and the link is here. And you'll get news about updates for the events. We look forward to seeing you at some of the future webinars and perhaps some of the coastal events during the summer.